Next up, we have an ESG guide to supply chain diversification in the toy industry with Carmel Giblin. Carmel?
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me okay. This is going to be a fairly... Hi, Maura. Just recognize you. Nice to see some friendly faces in the crowd. This is going to be just a quick 20-minute session. And as the title says, it is around supply chain diversification, which seems to be a very, very hot topic for a lot of companies now. So let me first introduce myself and the organization. My name is Carmel Giblin, and I am the CEO of an organization called the Ethical Supply Chain Program. I'll tell you a little bit about us so you understand who we are and where our perspective comes from, really. The Ethical Supply Chain Program was created 20 plus years ago, and we were created by the global toy industry, albeit now we work in many sectors and categories. But we were created by the global toy industry it was around the time really when the media started to get interested in labor standards and concerns about the treatment of workers in global supply chains. And the toy industry wanted to be responsible, and it wanted to get ahead of that criticism and understand really what was going on in the supply chains. And at that time, and still really today, the majority of the supply chain was located in China and remains in China still pretty much today. So we were created as an independent, not-for-profit organization, so independent of the toy industry, but created by the toy industry, to provide that assurance and help build suppliers' capability in meeting their international customers, retailers, licensors' needs. So we've operated formally since 2004, although the concept started to be talked about in the late 1990s. We are, as I said, a specialist program. So although we work beyond the toy industry, we are very much rooted in the toy industry. So we understand the toy business better than anyone else from our perspective of the work we do, not from your perspective of making and selling toys, but of what we do. We work with thousands of brands and retailers, so pretty much name a brand or a retailer, and they are a member of our program. So from the big retailers, Costco, Target, Walmart, etc., specialist retailers, all the major licensors, Disney's, etc., and then all the brands from startups right through to the giants. So we are well networked within that sector. Fundamentally, we are here to provide assurance about the treatment of workers in global supply chains. But we do more than just audit, and that's something that is really, really important to us. We do more than just go in and tick boxes. We want to build long-term relationships built on trust, respect, transparency that help add value and drive standards within the toy industry that benefit everyone. So benefit your suppliers, you as customers of those suppliers potentially, and the workers in them. So we help really businesses reduce risk, implement their strategies effectively, but also take the opportunity to move the compliance conversation from something that is a bit of a burden, a bit of a pain in the backside, and something that should be cut costs on, and moving it to something where you can really make opportunities to enhance the lives of workers, but also improve business efficiencies. So that's a little bit about us. Oh no, she said, don't press the black one. And it's the one button I've just pressed. Sorry. Right. So what are some of the challenges? And I'll go back to this session and the title of it. You are facing probably some of the most uncertain times in business right now. And uncertainty is never good for business. So part of what we want to do as someone who cares about the toy industry is help you address some of those challenges. So when we look at supply chain diversification, there's kind of three drivers for that currently in a lot of the conversations that we're having. Regulatory being an obvious one. There is more regulation coming towards business than ever before, and especially if you operate internationally. Europe, there is a lot happening, CSDDD, CRSD, etc. There is some kind of pause on that at the moment, and whether it will go through fully as anticipated or not is still up for debate. I don't think that any of us can assume that regulation is not going to, though, generally increase globally over a period of time. So you need to be set for meeting regulation, and it needs to be something within your business that doesn't become a massive cost or a massive resource drain on your business. So getting ready for regulation is really important. And it's also, though, driving why companies are thinking about a more diversified supply chain. Tariffs, obviously a very, very hot topic right now. They've been, I guess, a concern, and they've been in place for many years in different parts of the world. It has led a lot of the companies that we're working with to think about a more diversified supply chain, reducing potentially the reliance upon China, which has been our key manufacturing and supplier base for forever, really. I'll come on to talk about why that's possibly easier said than actually done, and why China will always remain important, I think, for the toy industry. So we'll talk a little bit about that in more detail. I would actually, on tariffs, I'd refer you back to the colleagues at the Toy Association, because they have done an amazing amount of work and sharing an awful lot of informed insights about what's happening with tariffs. So they are way more expert on that whole area than me, but please make sure you're looped into the whole policy team led by Catherine at the TA now, because they are doing some great work there. I met with Catherine actually yesterday, and one thing we talked about was be mindful of reciprocal tariffs that may be coming and aren't quite as publicly talked about, and the implications of those and where they may fall. So I think that was great advice from Catherine, and I'd encourage you to pick up with the policy team at the Toy Association. And then it's the challenge, I think, of finding suitable alternatives. There's been a lot of talk. I've been involved in this organization for the last 10 years. And pretty much since I joined, people have been talking about exiting China. And it's not really happened. It hasn't happened because our manufacturing partners for businesses in China are doing a really good job. We've built long-term relationships where the quality is as we expect it, the price is good, reliability and the relationship is very positive. Finding that alternative somewhere else is not straightforward. We'll look at some of the alternatives and the opportunities in those, but it isn't as straightforward. And also, when it comes to things like social labor standards, China is probably more advanced than many other areas. They've been used to being audited by companies for many, many years. They know how to deal with that. They know how to respond. They know how to improve. So I think that's something that's obviously a challenge for companies. One thing that we want to do is make it easier for organizations to find suppliers anywhere in the world that they're looking for them. And I'll talk in a moment about where we operate. But that is a key kind of role that we play, particularly maybe for smaller companies who don't have huge sourcing teams and can spend their life lost in Alibaba or something else. So for you, we feel your pain. So part of what we do is help you find suppliers that can make products for you that are already certified and meeting the labor standards requirements that you have. So you can get your products quickly on shelf, which ultimately is what everyone wants. So we'll talk a little more about that in a moment. Moving on, what can you do right now in terms of thinking about supply chain diversification? Firstly, understand your supply chain, and you will be amazed. And no matter your size of company, I guarantee you probably don't know everyone who's in your supply chain. And actually, the larger you are, the bigger that challenge is. Some of us think the big boys have got it all sorted. Believe me, they are probably battling with understanding who's in their supply chain and who's producing what and where they are, much more than some of the smaller companies. So the first thing I would suggest that you do is try to get an update on your suppliers, where they are and what are they producing for you, and how important are they to your business? Are they a kind of nurture? Are they a extra, extract yourself from, etc.? So understand who they are. Work with trusted partners. I'd nominate us as a start, but there are other options available. But I would suggest that you work with a partner that can help you. There is lots of organizations out there like us who can really help you navigate to suppliers that you can trust and build relationships with. And I think it's important to understand and have that strategic kind of conversation about, is a diversified supply chain right for you? Or are you better to stay with what you've got and nurture and develop that and ensure that you're protected, so that you're meeting the regulatory challenges that may be coming your way? But also think about where you want your supply chain to be in the longer term, and how can you start to think about making connections with new suppliers now? Those relationships can take a long time to build. Maybe you want to start with a relatively small order. They possibly want to start with a relatively small order from you because they need to trust and know you as well. So I think starting to understand your product development strategy, where you want to be, where your consumers are. I think we've seen a lot of talk about nearshoring as well. And whilst some of that is related to tariffs and geopolitical concerns, it's not all related to that. There's great environmental benefits from nearshoring. So there is opportunities in the Northern Triangle with countries there that, again, I'll talk about in a moment. So think about where your consumers are and where your suppliers are and the connections between those two. In terms of market landscape, this is just our certified factories. So the Ethical Supply Chain Program, where we have factories certified. This is growing quite considerably, but certainly it is, as you would expect it to reflect, where toy manufacturing has been historically. So our number one country of operation is China. We probably have around 800 factories who are certified by us operating in China. And Vietnam would be our second biggest country of operation. China has been dominant. I think when I first joined, there was probably figures were talked about 75-80% of the world's toys were produced in China. I think that figure hasn't changed significantly since then. A few percentage points, but not so much. But in the last 2 years, we have seen a dramatic increase in growth overseas. So I think in Vietnam, our certified factories numbers have increased by 20% in the last 2 years. But in Indonesia, 100% in the last 2 years. And we see that growing. 3 of our biggest or longest term partners in China are building new factories and new facilities in Indonesia. And these suppliers are looking for new business. They want business globally. We're also seeing a lot of interest in other Southeast Asian countries, so Cambodia, etc. So and in India, obviously, of course. All of these countries have opportunities and challenges. There's, India, it can be complicated to do business in. It has some issues around infrastructure. One of the benefits of China is that the manufacturing is largely located in the south. Excellent access to ports and roads, etc. The entire supply chain is there. So another thing I think to think about when you are thinking about diversifying your supply chain is the rest of the supply chain in that country too. So are you going to be able to get all your component parts into the final manufacturing destination efficiently and cost efficiently, both time efficiently and cost efficiently? And that's a big issue for a lot of people. They move their production somewhere and then they realize they're still relying upon another country to actually complete it. So that goes back to my first point about really knowing where your products are being produced, who's producing and what they are, because that should inform also where you think in the long term. And I think the emerging markets are really interesting. I'll talk in a moment, but about particularly the Northern Triangle. So Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador. We were recently introduced to an organization called Huge. They're an American 501c6, I think, type association. Let me get that right. And they have invested or enabled 7.5 billion US dollars in they're an American organization in developing manufacturing capabilities in that Northern Triangle. They've got some really interesting stories about connecting a Carolina-based apparel company with a apparel manufacturer in El Salvador and the benefits that had and I think the jobs it has created. So there's some really interesting opportunities in there, and I think an area for us all to perhaps consider, particularly based on what your product type might be. So if you're plush, for example, I think that Northern Triangle has fantastic skills available to you. It's very close geographically. And I was going to say there was a lot of support from the US kind of government agencies to promote that part of manufacturing and developing jobs in those countries. That's obviously taken a little bit of a hit recently, but I think the intention by business is still very much to look at that area. So some emerging markets. I'm just going to take a couple of minutes to highlight the pros and cons of some of these. It's not exhaustive. I'm not an expert in trade in any of these areas. It's just kind of what we're seeing and hearing from companies. Indonesia seems to be the hotspot at the moment. If you're considering other parts of Southeast Asia, Indonesia has a very large population, a skilled population, and a good infrastructure. So there is lots of opportunities there. I'm just going to refer to my notes a second on that. Labor costs are also low in Indonesia, and they have a diversity of manufacturing. So they don't just specialize in apparel or in one sector. There's quite a broad market there. Some challenges, I guess we would say the infrastructure probably needs more development and investment, and that's not within industry's gift. That's kind of a government gift, so it's a bit longer term investment that's required there. And I think in all of these emerging markets, and I won't repeat it for each one, but it does stand for all of them, they do need more support when it's around product quality, in labor standards, understanding. Now, that's not to say there's not capability in those countries, but with any new market, you need to make time and invest in helping your suppliers in those markets reach the standards that are required. In Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, Mexico, kind of all nearer to the US, I think they all offer the same kind of benefits. All of those, however, particularly Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, very appropriate, I think, for anything related to plush or textiles or apparel. They've got real skills in those areas, have been long-time providers to the core apparel industry. So I would definitely encourage looking at those. And I guess in all of them, and in all of your thinking, there needs to be the kind of impact of tariffs, because it won't be just the obvious places, and it will be reciprocal tariffs are something to consider. And these could be quite significant in some of these areas. I think we were talking as well about blended tariffs. So in somewhere like India, where you have import tariffs of around 70%, that could be the reciprocal tariffs that's then put. So you really need to do some research and understand it. And like I say, the team at the Toy Association, led by Catherine, are your go-to people. I'd really encourage you to join whatever calls and conversations they're having on this topic. There is, and I've got 1 minute left, so if anyone's got any questions, we will nip over there afterwards, or there or wherever. You can grab us. There is myself, and there's also my colleague Todd, who is just at the back there. We're happy to take any questions. There is, we work very closely with the US Toy Association, and for the last couple of months, we've input a program which enables members of the Toy Association to have free membership of the Ethical Supply Chain Program. You have to be in a certain criteria, but basically on a smaller level, so under 50 million in terms of US revenue per annum. If you are, and we've got some flyers that we can hand out, then you're automatically entitled to become a member of the Ethical Supply Chain Program. The biggest benefit for you of that is that you get access to our Connect technology platform. And that enables you to find suppliers all over the world that are already certified. So I think in the first few months, we've had about 50 Toy Association companies come on board. And the guys have made about 60 introductions to factories in the program. So really cutting time in terms of helping people navigate to new suppliers quickly. So like I say, you have access to the portal, access to the team, and real help and expertise in navigating the regulatory compliance field that's ahead of everyone. That, and I've done it again, but that was the last slide anyway. So like I say, we're happy to take any questions. You can email us, and I've got some flyers for any companies that are in that section. So below 50 million turnover and a Toy Association member, we can give you a form. It's not a form, but just scan it. And then you get to become an Ethical Supply Chain member free of charge. So thank you very much for your time. Any questions, we're happy to take them over there.